Oh yeah! Let's get this party started. Thank you very much. Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. It has indeed been a hot minute since the last time I've done one of these video progress reports, but it is not to say that progress has been at a standstill. As a matter of fact, this time around there's so much to report on that I'm gonna have to split it up into separate videos. Over the course of the past year, I have actually been slowly embracing offline recording and offline development rather than live streaming my process, simply because I noticed that I've been able to concentrate a lot better on the tasks at hand, and just in general, offline recordings seem to be doing wonders for my productivity. I still record the entire process of game development and I still comment on everything that I do, but who knows, maybe solitude just helps me concentrate on my work. In the end, there's only so many hours in the day, and my main goal is to make progress on any one of my projects every day of the week. And if I can achieve that by recording my game development process in offline mode, then, well, so be it. The videos are still there. Now, despite everything that's going on in the world, this past year has actually been very fruitful in terms of productivity. I've made plenty of progress in some existing projects, and I've put together a number of new prototypes, all of which amounts to about 280 videos of production content of various projects, each lasting between 1 to 3 to sometimes even 5 hours long. And now that all those videos have been finally scheduled on the website, I got a chance to make this report video. So let's take a look at the summary of all the game dev goodies included in those videos. We're gonna start this update series with a brand new prototype, a post-apocalyptic survival game, which pulls its inspiration from my topmost favorite survival action game, Fallout. Now, you may be saying, Fallout? Really? The giant open world, massive story, huge production and marketing budget Fallout? New Vegas that had 50 people working on it? 3 that had 80 people working on it? Fallout 4 that had over 100 people working on it? You're gonna do that in Godot by yourself. No, I'm not. What I want to do is I want to experiment with a prototype which incorporates the sort of systems like the quest system, the dialogue system, the inventory management system, the combat system, and kind of put together almost like a pseudo open world game that only makes itself seem like this giant open world adventure, and the game effectively takes place during one of the supposed side quests that the player would go on to explore this abandoned mall from way before the pre-war era. You see, ever since I discovered Fallout 3, I have basically fallen in love with the whole idea of a science fiction, retrofuturistic, post-apocalyptic world. I simply can't get enough of that whole 50s retro aesthetic. And Fallout just happens to tick all the right checkboxes for me. Science fiction, retrofuturism, horror, post-apocalyptic setting, detective noir, action, and mystery. Like, yes, obviously I can't make a Fallout game by myself. What I can, however, make is a prototype. And I want to make the prototype in a very particular way. You see, the quest system, the dialogue system, the inventory system, even though this isn't a large open world game, I'm still going about programming the systems as if it were one. This means that if for any reason this project actually gets to the point where it starts gaining some sort of traction, the systems programmed into the game are scalable to permit it to grow in all directions. I'm not screwing myself into the corner by hard coding a limited inventory system or a limited dialogue system. Furthermore, this past year I have been noticing a particular trend in the way I go about programming games. I seem to have started leaning more towards open world-ish role-playing games where you simply have access to a majority of the world. You can go into whatever direction you want and you encounter characters who give you quests, they give you missions, you have an inventory to deal with, you have certain stats to work with, and that seems to be the sort of thing that has seeped into just about every game and every prototype I've started working on. On the side note, I've also been looking into potential sources of financing for these projects, and some GDC talks have actually pointed out that investors tend to like to see some sort of tendency, some sort of a sense of direction. They like to see that a studio is trying to focus on a particular genre or particular style or particular mechanics, because they would simply get better and better and better and better at delivering those sort of mechanics with each and every next project. Plus, they can also build up on what they have already developed from the previous project without having to, say, starting from scratch and coming up with a whole new system, because their next project has nothing to do with what they have done in the past. So for me, this means that the dialogue systems, the inventory systems, the quest systems can simply be cut out from this project, ported over to the new one, and then simply built on top of. As of the making of this report, there are currently 62 videos in the playlist for the production of Atomicon. We started with a few pieces of concept art to try to figure out what is the general design of the mall that the player is going to be exploring. There are several iterations where I try to experiment with the aesthetic and end up landing on this tall-looking design. We set up the first-person character controller, get the movement going, we downloaded a set of hands from Sketchfab, we block out the basic level geometry using very simple shapes and CSG nodes available in Godot engine. Because it's a semi-open world type of game, there's going to be a lot of terrain involved, so we load up the Zillion Height Map terrain plugin into Godot and start playing around with its features. We spent a lot of time modeling out the basic geometry for the mega mall, the exterior aesthetic. The CSG mesh features in Godot have come in really handy, blocking out the basic idea of the layout for the parking lot and the front of the mega mall. Anytime I get an idea for some sort of a prop or object to place in the level, the CSG meshes have come in really handy. You can really block out some very basic silhouettes of an object you intend to put in place and remind yourself in the future what you wanted to place there. Later on, we're going to be coming back and replacing these placeholders with actual fully 3D model meshes of those props. And because a few simple shapes are all that we really need to suggest what it is that we intended to place in a particular location, as you can see, simple cylinders, cubes, cones, and spheres is all that we really need to place those suggestions and get a general feel for what the level will look like. Even for basic prop ideas, within just a few minutes, using some very simple shapes, I set up the suggestion for these delivery trucks, taking place in the receiving section on the side of the mall. We download a few open source textures, set up the fencing prop mesh, place the props throughout the entire receiving section, place an explosion crater with one of the trucks in its epicenter, and as a cherry on top, I got this idea for a wacky looking bus station. It was kind of like an elongated cylinder with a tower on one of the sides. CSG mesh nodes in Godot engine also allow you to perform Boolean operations, which means you can use boxes and cylinders to quickly cut out suggestions for rooms and windows in your objects. To change things up a bit, we switched to modeling some first-person weapons. This here is an idea of a junk rifle, a weapon made out of entirely of spare parts. We go through the process of designing the concept art, modeling, texturing, and animating the entire process with first-person hands involved. This is where my experience of working on the Dream Team Theater project has really come in handy. That too was a first-person shooter project, and I had learned a lot about how Godot engine handles rigged objects, animations, and how to combine weapon and hand animations together in one single object. Popping into Godot, we programmed the little sway animation for when we turn the camera. We also programmed the animation for reloading, putting away and taking the weapon out, as well as looking through the iron sights. Some of these movements have been programmed with nothing but code, some of them have been baked into the animation of the weapon, and some of them are actually a combination of both, like the iron sight. With the weapon finished, our next step was to create the inventory system, which means it was time to create the personal computer that was going to accompany us in our adventures. It is the computer through which we handle our quests, view our stats, take a look at our inventory, and get any useful information about the ongoing tasks. We spent quite a bit of time looking for references of old tech to get inspiration from, and eventually start experimenting with various approaches to how we can build such a device. We ended up trailing through several design ideas, various methods methods of holding the device in place. We tried blocking out some basic geometry shapes just to see if we can design some sort of a bulky silhouette before we go into the details. And sometimes the very first attempt just ends up looking kind of goofy and almost unrealistic in the aesthetic that we're trying to achieve. So I ended up deciding to scrap the idea and starting from scratch because there were just too many initial design flaws that were already rooted in the design, and to get a fresh idea I just had to start from a blank slate. And boy, good thing that I did, because compared to the first one, the second iteration came out eons better than whatever nonsense I was trying to build before. What's interesting is that this particular version was completely improvised. I tried starting with some concept art, and to be honest, the previous result is exactly what you saw that lead to. Concept art is fantastic to start with, but sometimes it just doesn't work. In this case, everything is improvised. I just went with the general flow of what I thought the design should look like, pulled up some references of retro tech from the internet, ended up going with this flip screen idea, and honestly, it came out pretty well. Of course, it's just a prototype, nothing is set in stone, we can always come back and make a new version of the design. The last thing we had to handle was the animation. We programmed the personal computer take out and put away animations in conjunctions with our FPS hands. And to be honest, if you had told me a couple of years ago that I'd be able to produce this all by myself, I would have told you, what the hell are you doing in my house and how did you get in here? With the physical computer in place, it's finally time to program the user interface and the inventory code. We end up borrowing some inventory handling behavior from Fallout and Elder Scrolls, going with a list-style inventory where different items are categorized in different sections. Both the inventory backend code and the user interface handling stuff go through a couple of iterations until we hone in on a system that allows us to easily scale it. The biggest challenge, albeit, was the programming of the inventory in three-dimensional space, considering effectively we're taking out a three-dimensional object that is displaying a two-dimensional interface, and somehow we had to convert our mouse clicks into clicks within this inventory space. Thankfully, Godot Engine has a bunch of assets that act as tutorials that you can just download and take a look at existing code to get that up and running. Which means now we needed some sort of a lootable container, some sort of a crate or maybe a mailbox that we can walk up to, interact with, view its inner contents, and grab some items into our own inventory. Now, by this point, I had attracted the attention of a gentleman who was looking for a project to help out on, which means I had somebody that I could send conceptual art drawings of 3D models, and they could model those objects in turn. This wouldn't really mean that I would be doing any less modeling myself, because this is, after all, an open world-like game. There's going to be plenty of things that we need to model, but at least this does make my life a little bit easier. In this case, this was the design of a newsprint distribution machine. There are two compartments, both of which could be opened and looted, and the player would usually find some pretty menial items inside. While the 3D modeler was busy working on that piece, I have decided to switch my attention to experimenting with the animation trees in Godot Engine. This was a zombie pack of motion capture animations that I purchased a couple of years back, but I haven't really had a project that I could use them on. Learning how to use motion capture data in your project would be very important because, well, again, I don't really want to animate every minor animation by myself. This also gave me a reason to learn about the animation trees and how to blend different animations together, and since this is a post-apocalyptic nuclear wasteland type of game, I'm sure we're gonna have some sort of irradiated ghouls or zombies or some creatures alike that we need to use as cannon fodder. We spent a little bit of time refactoring the ideas, writing down some game mechanics, some design philosophy, the direction we want to take the prototype into, and then we had spent a whole bunch of time collecting a massive amount of image references. We needed a whole lot of stuff to capture the aesthetic, from neon signs to city infrastructure, to vehicles, to building designs, to architecture. And we were generally paying attention to the aesthetic, shapes, type fonts, and negative space of the shapes we found. Needless to say, we ended up with, I think, about 15 gigabytes of reference material to work with, and at that point, it was time to move on to something else. Since this was the very first time I worked on a project with someone else, there were some communication and workflow kinks I had to iron out, so I had decided to design a second newspaper stand, more or less improvised at this point, so that I could model it and texture it and showcase the process to the 3D modeler so they get the idea of the workflow. Having done a number of projects in Godot before and more or less understanding the process that goes behind modeling and texturing that yields the fastest results with Godot, I thought it was a good opportunity to kind of go through the motions, design an object from the beginning to the end, get it textured, and send the videos over to the 3D modelers so that they can get familiar with the process that I have personally found to work pretty well, and we could optimize our workflow together. Plus, having a secondary newspaper dispenser meant there were multiple companies in this virtual world. It is a story about the crushing nature of capitalism, it would enrich the story, and the player would get additional containers to loot through as they're exploring the world. In the end, we gotta work on the inventory system anyways, and we gotta make it with the modular approach in mind so that we can scale it to any number of objects, any number of lootable containers and crates, without having to program a single extra line of code to make it work. So in the end, I ended up settling on this quick loot option that pops up to the side of the container, allowing us to quickly grab whatever items are inside. Interestingly enough, this style of looting hasn't been present in Fallout until Fallout 4 was developed by Bethesda, and then somebody had created the mods for Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas to incorporate the same style of looting into those games as well. You can also observe the same exact style of looting menu in a game called Outer Wilds, developed by Obsidian, who just so happened to also be responsible for developing Fallout New Vegas. Clearly that style of menu had made an impression, so I figured, why not? We might as well implement something similar in our project as well. In the next couple of videos, we pull some more references for city infrastructure. We end up modeling some of our own infrastructure in the form of a modular road building kit. We'll put together a quick conceptual art piece for a street lamp. Then we get ourselves a couple of very affordable tree packs and see how we can adapt them to be usable in Godot Engine, since a lot of them were meant for Unity or Unreal. We spent some time playing around with tree props, dialing in the soil textures, just playing around with the general arrangement and experimenting with the scenery that the player sees when they enter this level. We model and texture a couple of roadside barriers, plug them into the level along the roadside to see what they look like. And then we wrap up with some additional concept artwork on the telephone booth concepts, as well as the telephone units themselves. I was going for something that has a screen that might be hackable and interactable from the personal computer terminal the player carries around. And while I think we got some interesting concepts for the telephones themselves, the booths ended up looking a little bit too much like something straight out of Jetsons, which wasn't really the intention of the aesthetic I was going for, but who knows? We got the designs, they're there. If we really need something wacky, we can always return there and pick something interesting. That is going to conclude this particular video. As I said, I had uploaded close to 300 videos onto the Concept Bay platform, so there's a lot to cover, and I don't want to make another 2-hour-long review video. So we're going to go ahead and wrap this up for the Atomicon report. If you're interested in following the development or learning from the process, you can find the videos on theconceptbay.net platform. I'll see you guys in the next part of this multi-part update video, and I hope you learned something.